Lot to dive into, as always, with the mayor of Kansas City, Quinton Lucas, is on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. And we have a lot going on in this town to dive into. But I would, obviously it's been a big part of our conversation this morning. I would like to get the mayor's opinions, not just on the Kamala Harris-Brett Baier interview, not the interview itself, but more the strategy behind the interview. So, Mr. Mayor, as someone who's a political wonk, take me through what a candidate makes decisions like this based on and how you come to the conclusion, if you're Kamala Harris, let's say 2.5 weeks before the election, to go on and do an interview with, someone who is going to be, let's say, more adversarial than some of the other interviews she's been on. What is that decision-making like?
There are certain times when you realize that the whole issue is making sure you don't run out of votes. And I think any smart strategist says this is where I identify my votes coming from in certain swing states. This is how we get to an electoral college win, and then recognizing there's a gap. Converting late-breaking undecideds is important. Anybody who actually reads demographic information for folks like Fox News, and I'd argue even your show, it is not 100% conservatives. There are more Democrats and independents who listen and watch these platforms than one might think. And so recognizing that it'll be a several thousand vote swing potentially, you say you got to get yourself in more places. Another change that I think is positive is that, lots of Vice President Harris's presidential campaign team, who, of course, were President Biden's presidential campaign team, went on this media strategy approach of rare, right? Not having them out that much, not having them vetted as much, and doing only these really signature special interviews. I think one looking at American politics over the last 4 years can see how flawed that was. Like him or not, and I'm not a big fan, but President Trump, right, will give you 2 hours of content from a rally and then these long-winded interviews. So it's very hard to just nail them on one statement because you have 500 others. Whereas Vice President Harris, who only gives you very little, right, is someone where you can cut quotes, the public doesn't get to know her, and you run into some of the questions now. So I think it's a positive change. I hope they do more of it. And we'll see if it makes a difference down the stretch.
Yeah, it will. And you are right, by the way, about the demographics of, I think, Fox and certainly this show as well. So now, meantime, all the things happening here in town. Good news yesterday. It looks like the Kansas City, Missouri police have arrested at least one person involved in the second Betty Ray's burglary in the last 3 weeks. When you look at what the law enforcement in this community is doing as they continue to focus, and you continue to focus on more of the property crimes happening in this town, have there been any changes that you can share when it comes to how you and Chief Graves have worked on trying to get more answers and get more arrests tied to some of the property crimes happening in Kansas City?
We have seen officers shifted to the property crimes unit to enhance their ability. First, frankly, it's a volume issue in some ways. There are a lot of car thefts. There are a lot of business thefts. That's never an excuse for us not making sure we can get things addressed. But that is one, to me, very vital change we look to when we reevaluate deployment all the time. I will say this for our property crimes folks, and, have some disagreements with Mr. Chateau. I know he was on your show the other day, but I feel for any business owner who's been victimized in this city. But our property crimes folks are working nonstop. They are making sure that they can actually find assailants and suspects. They're looking for patterns. In this situation, that second suspect, who did not seem to be fleet of foot in any way, was somebody they were able to track down, and I'm proud of them for doing that, working with KCKPD as well. But, yeah, you're going to see us continue to try to address more deployment issues long term. The chief and I and the board are going to have very real conversations about how we get more officers back out on the street, something that's vital. Another thing that is never discussed, really, is, how do we make sure we can train more officers? It's fair to say our city, like many other cities, has had a major police academy that does the training for officers for a number of years. It gives you officer quality. However, lots of officers in other jurisdictions come out of junior college systems, larger training areas, and beyond. And so there's a lot to look to, how we get a pipeline of enough officers, how they're deployed. That work never ends.
So then on that note, you mentioned officers in the streets. What does that look like when you've got a department that, as you noted, is off about 300 officers? What have the conversations been with the chief and the department at large in terms of making that a priority and making that happen? Because, you've heard it from a lot of the folks in these small businesses. They want to see more of that foot patrol in places like River Market.
Yeah, there are a few things that you need to make sure you do. First, and I've heard a lot of people say you want to get the politics out of it. I agree. We need to look forward and see a few things that are vital. One, civilianizing positions, i.e. making positions that are currently held by officers in some areas, ones that civilians, analysts, and others handle, is a fundamental part of major city policing. And I know people will disagree 6 ways to Sunday. I certainly recognize the importance of officers. But I was speaking to a physician the other day, and I see it kind of like this. I had a baby not long ago, Pete. You had a baby, too. Your interaction with the actual medical doctor isn't as extensive as those of you who might not have experienced childbirth in your family may think, right? Basically, you're dealing with nurses. You're working with lots of other folks. You're working with a nurses and anesthetist if necessary. You have all these other people before you actually get to the physician who delivers the baby. And in this situation, I think we need to see police officers as truly trained specialists and have lots of other folks who can help us to the fullest extent possible in making sure that we're going over cell phone data when we retrieve those sorts of things, looking over videos and camera information throughout the city, which is an extensive part of how we do investigations now. Making sure we have more folks in those areas, and certainly in all the back office areas, HR, different finance areas and beyond. I mean, I think it is important that we have officers on the streets. That's one thing. The second thing is making sure that we're not just doing kind of pie-in-the-sky recruiting techniques. Recall, it was controversial to me, not to many others, but we removed the residency requirement a few years back thinking that would get us a lot more officers. We increased salaries saying that would get us a lot more officers. And, maybe it's gotten a few here or there, but it has not moved the needle tremendously. We have to look at a new way to recruit a 20-something type of person. I got dinner with my nephew last night who's re-enlisted in the Army, God bless him. He's going down to Fort Benning, or I think they call it Fort Moore now. And I was talking to him about policing. And he did say, look, the way you got to recruit in the Army or the way you recruit in police is different than perhaps what leadership or the command staff thinks. We're not getting 50-year-old dudes anymore, right? We're getting much younger people in most situations. We need to find a way to talk to them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's an issue for many urban police departments right now around the country. You're right. Right. And just to give credit where it's due, our wives birthed those babies. I don't want to take any credit for all that hard work that they did for 9 months, I'm just going to put that out there.
We just showed up. That's exactly right.
Yep. Show up and smile. Now, with that being said, you mentioned Chateau, who was on the show. He owns Betty Ray's. He mentioned having issues figuring out how to apply for the funds from the city to get the reimbursements for security upgrades. I believe that window opened up this week on Tuesday.
Yep.
What can you tell people on the simplest, easiest way to go about applying and what the turnaround time is realistically going to be?
I'll make it very easy for you, right? If you have all the questions in the world, call 311 in Kansas City and ask for a woman by the name of Nia Richardson, NIA. She's the manager of that program, can get you the answers you need. If you get stuck in different calls and all that, it can get confusing. There is information on the City Hall website. It's kcmo.gov. You could go to small business. There are links there, but it'll give you basically the application and everything on the list from there. What Mr. Chateau ran into before, and by the way, and again, with the greatest respect to him, I do appreciate that while a lot of our social media back and forth was how useless the Small Business Fund was, he too will look to avail himself of the program. I mean, I think that speaks to the very merits of the program itself, not saying that we don't stop paying for policing and everything like that. But, I think that you can go to the website, you look that up. We had a pre-interest form to just see, frankly, how many people might be interested. We had, I think, about 184 people who said that they were interested in this fund. We look to be as expeditious as possible. I think by Thanksgiving was our estimate of what we could get recommended to City Council. Okay,
so you're hoping that people will know whether or not they receive these funds in the next 6 weeks or so. Is that fair?
That's our hope. Our hope. I will say one wrinkle. If we don't get it done before Thanksgiving, and this sounds like bureaucratic slowdown, but it's necessary to avoid corruption, you do need a City Council vote to approve those funds getting sent out. So our city staff people will put all it together, give us a big list of recommendations. My hope is we can do it before the Thanksgiving recess. If we don't, that pushes you back to December, and that is good government because you don't want us just cutting a bunch of checks. That's how you get scandals with people sending things to 10 of their friends and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mayor Lucas on KCMO. Last thing on this issue, since it is obviously the top issue, I would say, in town right now. There was a comment the other day made by the CEO of an organization, nonprofit, KC Common Good, saying that we need billions of dollars to basically reduce crime in this town. I think, and I said that's ridiculous. I believe you were agreeing with me when you wrote on X that people think money is the answer. That's the easy thing to say. prevent, recruit, enforce, don't just fund new programs. So how does that change your approach going into 2025 and the budget conversation that's going to be taking place soon?
I mean, look, when I was running for mayor, as I've been mayor, and back when I was a councilman, and frankly, as a civilian, I thought, there is this kind of criminal prevention industrial complex that exists in the world. And I say this with the greatest respect to people, all of whose hearts are in the right place. But you don't just need a new program for everything. There are things that fundamentally are clear. And I'm going to try to be as quick as possible because you said it's the last question. Yes, you need good schools, you need better housing, you need all that sort of stuff in the far kind of upstream type issues. That's 100% true. Schools already exist. Help them out, right? You need counselors in the schools. Okay, that's a pinpointed area of funding. All right. So then as your person grows up, you need, if they are engaged in bad behavior, consequences. That is municipal prosecutors, county prosecutors, juvenile prosecutors, make sure that they're accountable, first of all, and make sure you're doing the steps necessary. You need law enforcement as a part of it. You need all of these steps, and you'll need detention on the later end, and then, of course, you need reentry on the later end. All of the things I just listed to you have existed in this country for 70 years, having varying degrees of success. What we need to do is focus more on that rather than, say, billions in X or Y kind of pilot program and plan. And again, I like everybody who's in this system. I think they're good human beings, all that sort of stuff. But I'll give you one example. We've had a City Hall summer internship program for years. I'd love to take credit for it, but it existed when Mayor Berkeley was mayor, all that sort of stuff, right? It became part of our violence prevention efforts. So maybe it seems like that's now part of violence prevention, but really what the heck it is something that people in the 80s and 70s were saying, yeah, we should have the kids have something to do so they can learn life skills and have a positive, productive life. What we're doing in this violent crime prevention industrial complex is more rebadging, reshaping, and all of that, which is something that I think I disagree with in the sense that you need to reshape it. No, we need to have jobs for the kids. We need to have good schools. We need to invest in prevention. One thing that I do like, we need to have a task force that looks at bad businesses that lead to shootings in their neighborhoods like we saw in Westport. But what we don't need is to say we need billions of dollars or 800 new programs or everybody to get together at the chamber boardroom every 2 months and say we've come up with something new.
I agree. And last thing, because you made me think of something there, the Westport deal. You guys shut down that business where there was the shooting last week, but apparently complaints were coming in for a year on that place. So what do you learn from that where you say if things are coming into our offices, complaints are coming in, what do we do so it doesn't take 5 people getting shot to finally be like, oh, yeah, we should probably do something about that?
I hear you on that, and I'm never going to lie to the Pete Mundo listening crowd. It's a tough balance, right? When you take somebody's business, you take their livelihood.
Yes.
They have a number of due process rights and all those steps. So that's why, look, I live in this community. You live in this community, too. You can drive by some places. Let's use, for example, every bar that's existed on the intersection of Truman and Grand for the last 15 years, right? Each of them you've been like, well, that looks like a terrible idea and it's going to be problematic. We should shut it down. But that's not how American business rights exist. And so, look, we try to, when we get complaints, act as expeditiously as possible. We have investigators out there. I'll concede to you we can probably move even faster. We'll continue to look to do so. But I'm always going to balance the right of a business to be able to operate if they're even narrowly following the laws, because you're right. There's a fine line between being a bar where a few underage kids get in, which is bad, but I shouldn't shut you down, versus a bar that's just allowing gross drug use and all those sort of things and rampant other criminal issues. There's a tough balance there, particularly in the business of nightclubs and drinking establishments, and we'll continue to try to get it right, but certainly before 5 people are shot. So that's a big focus of mine in this mayoral administration. We'll make sure we do even more of it.
There you go. Mayor Lucas on KCMO. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We always appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey, take care, everybody.
All right. That's Quinton Lucas on KCMO.